I'm Jerry Marcello. Welcome to the City Center podcast from West Palm Beach, Florida. Hurricane season is here. What do you need to do to prepare? How can you stay safe? And how do you protect your family? We'll talk about it next on the City Center podcast from West Palm Beach. And joining me today is Brent Bloomfield, Assistant Fire Chief for the City of West Palm Beach. Brent, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We've talked about this before many times, but it always bears repeating. Preparation is the key to surviving a storm. What does that entail? What does it do? What should people here locally be thinking about?
I think the number one thing is knowing, the hurricane season. It starts on June 1st. It runs through November 30th. And what we've seen is in the last few years, we've seen these hurricane seasons just get, more and more devastating. We're starting to see a change in how these hurricanes are ramping up, rapid intensification. So with that being said, you want to make sure that you prepare for the worst case scenario. What is worst case scenario? Well, worst case scenario is we have a Cat 5 like Dorian bearing down on us, but it doesn't make that turn. It comes right across us, like a Hurricane Andrew, or on the West Coast, we've seen Michael and we've seen Ian and we've seen, a ton of different storms. Mm-hmm. So the preparation is very simple. Make sure that your house is in order. Number one, inside and outside. Make sure that the trees are trimmed. Make sure that everything that can be picked up is picked up. Then things that are easily moved, make sure you have somewhere to take them whenever a storm comes. Inside the house, make sure that you have plenty of food and water for the event. Start that now, not 2 days before the storm. Right. You get perishable food items that you'll eat later, water that you're going to drink later. You can always drink it later. You can always eat perishable food later. Things like peanut butter and jelly, things like canned foods, canned meat like tuna. Those are always good things. Make sure that your medication is up to date, and you can run it through for, if you have to get a 90-day supply, get a 90-day supply if that can run you through. Make sure if we have a storm that's going to be coming that you don't wait till the day before to fill those prescriptions. Sure. Make sure you get them done early. Make sure that all your paperwork is in order, especially your insurance paperwork. Make sure that's in a watertight bag, easy to get to, because once the storm clears, and you start to, we're out of the phase of the 72 hours where we're in a phase of we're responding, we're trying to save people, then the recovery starts, right? So the recovery part for you as a citizen is you want to make sure that you get a hold of your insurance company if you have any damage, and you want to make sure that your paperwork's in order so it's an easy transition for you.
I think a lot of people make the mistake, or they get the mental idea that, I'll just call it up on my phone, or it'll be on my PC. Yeah. We might not have power for a long time afterwards.
Well, we may not have power or signal. So That was one of the things that we ran into in Hurricane Michael when we were in the Panhandle. We had a 20-mile area there was no signal at all. Wow. When you have no signal, that means you have no communication. So you think that you're going to just be able to pull these things up on your phone because that's what we're used to, right?
Right.
20 years ago, everything was hard paper. You had everything in folders, that kind of stuff. Now, everything is kept, all your files on your computer or they're on your phone. And if you may have power for a certain amount of time on those devices, but eventually it's going to run out. And if you don't have a way to re-energize them or back them up, you're not going to be able to get that information.
Absolutely.
So this is something that you want to make sure that your hard copies are in some type of water sealed. Big Ziploc bag's always good. You can, especially the ones that have the double seal on them. Mm-hmm. Those usually hold up pretty well. And then just make sure that you're keeping those in a safe place.
So as we're approaching hurricane season, one of the things that we're going to be doing, as you just mentioned, is stockpiling supplies for a certain amount of time during and after a storm, so that members of your family have proper food, have proper water. Right. What about pets?
Yeah, same thing with pets. You want to make sure that same thing with them, right? You want to make sure their medication is up to date if they take medication, and you have it to run through like a 90-day, and then of course food. Make sure you have plenty of food leading into hurricane season. I would say that if you stockpile, try to stockpile at least a week. Used to be 3 days, and then what we found is that a week's better. So if you can do a week of stockpiling, it just really helps with that transit. Because then you're not, when we have these pods, points of distribution, where we're handing out water and ice and that kind of, and maybe you get a couple of MREs for the week. Those get overcrowded. They get overcrowded. There's people in line for maybe hours. And if you have all that at home already, it just makes it so much easier. It's just less strain on you, and it's less strain on the system.
Question. If I'm at home and power's out, going to be a couple, 3 days or more before I get the opportunity to get regular electricity back in the home, should I be thinking about a camp stove, and how would I use it if I were to do something?
Well, if you're going to use something like that, anything that's like a camp stove or something that is propane or something along that lines, just make sure you don't use it inside. That's number one. Important. And number two, make sure when you use it safely, because you're talking about something that it's an open flame. It's something that, if it builds up enough, and it can be a little bit, tiny bit explosive.
Sure.
And then on the same token with that, when we're talking about that, your generator. Make sure that your generator is outside of your house as well. You don't want your generator in an enclosed environment because it builds up CO, and that unfortunately we've had that problem even in my career, where I've seen it, where we've been into houses where people were running the generators and passed away. So you just want to make sure that you're not doing that. Anything that has an open flame and can create like CO or something that disrupts the oxygen in your environment, you don't want that inside. You want to make sure that's all outside.
And I would think that would apply to it during the storm when it's dark and it's windy outside. People might want to light a candle. You don't want to do that inside.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine to have candles. 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 Right. Candles are fine. The problem is that you want to make sure that if you're going to go to bed or you're going to do something like that, you want to make sure that those candles are put out completely before you lay down to go to bed. Anything smoking, candles, any of that, those are open flames. You have to treat them, with respect.
Okay. For folks who are new to the area, or folks who are really not, paying close attention to classification of storms, we have different levels of severity and strength. Let's go over a little bit of that, and where is it that we really start to have to be totally on our toes as far as getting prepared?
Well, you have to be totally on your toes to be prepared for anything.
Right.
So we just had Hurricane Milton, which actually hit several hundred miles away from us, but the feeder bands threw tornadoes at us, a record number of tornadoes for the state of Florida, a record number of tornadoes for Palm Beach County. We had more EF3 storm tornadoes than we've had pretty much, in the last 50 years in one go.
Wow.
And so it doesn't matter what the storm is, whether it's a tropical storm all the way to a Cat 5, you need to be prepared. Okay. However, a tropical storm is usually like a very unorganized system. It's not fully together yet. Sometimes those can be some of the worst because they can sit on top of you for days and days. I remember back to Hurricane Francis, and Hurricane Francis wasn't a super strong storm. It was a Category 2, not super strong. When it hit the coast, it downgraded to a Category 1, but it sat on top of us for 36 straight hours.
Wow.
And just doused us. And so that was probably a very dangerous storm, even though it was only a Category 1 when it hit us. It was a very dangerous storm because of all of the flooding that it caused. Sure. So category, historically, Category 1s are basically like a giant thunderstorm, lots of rain, some wind. We see thunderstorms in Florida in the afternoons in the summer with sometimes 60-mile-an-hour winds. So it's similar to that, but on a bigger scale. A Category 2, now we're starting to get into like some more devastating winds, depending on which way it comes in. Storm surge we have to worry about. So the stronger the storm and the way it comes in, you could get higher and higher storm surge. And then a Category 3 is what we call starting to get into the major category. Right. Category 4 is a very, very strong storm. It's basically a Category 5 minus a few miles per hour. So they're very, very devastating. And then a Category 5, which is the most major storm, we've seen a few of those lately. And believe it or not, since 2000, we've had more Category 5 storms make landfall in the United States than we had since 1850. Wow. So it's, we're starting to see these rapid intensification of these storms. A Category 5 is a storm that if you're anywhere near an evacuation zone, or you're in an evacuation zone, you really need to think about leaving. Evacuation zone, you absolutely need to leave. If you're on the fringe of evacuation zone, possibly. But I would say don't take those storms lightly, because we have seen people that have taken them lightly and they've paid for it with their lives.
Well, we're talking about evacuation zones. How would I know if I'm in an evacuation zone?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways. One of them is to go to our website, WPB.org/hurricane. We have the evacuation zones there. Palm Beach County Department of Emergency Management also has them. They have booklets at your local libraries with that information in it as well. And also You can get them at any of the county buildings. They have those, and we have them here at the city. Those booklets are pretty good in regards to the information they have in them. They have how you're going to build a kit, things that you need to do pre-storm, things you need to do post-storm. Which, if we're talking post-storm, you don't need to do anything but stay in your house. We'll get to that in a minute. And then, of course, your evacuation zones. And then we base those evacuation zones a lot of times on modeling for storm surge. Our major concern is flooding.
Sure.
The wind is a concern,
Right.
But flooding, water is very, very dangerous, and it weighs, it's about 8.5 pounds a gallon. So when you're getting thousands of gallons of water pushed, your thousands of pounds of pressure against your structure, it could be devastating, and it could wash you away. It can, it could do a lot of damage. So if you are in evacuation zone and you're told to evacuate, you need to evacuate.
Now, we saw the damage that Hurricane Ian did to the West Coast as far as flooding was concerned. Some of the most stunning video you've ever seen of the water running through the city and wiping things out. Is that possible here?
Yeah, of course. When you're a coastal city, even if you're on an intercoastal, you're still a coastal city. So what does that mean? Whenever we have storm surge, we do have barrier islands. So we have, for us in the city, it's town of Palm Beach. Down south, it's Manalapan. Then you got Jupiter Island North. Those are barrier islands. If there is, we still have cutouts. So those cutouts still bring in the storm surge. So whenever you have a storm surge, and we've seen it here in the city, we've actually Hurricane Nicole, which was not a major storm. It was a Category 1, but the way that it came in, it actually brought us about 4.5 feet of storm surge, which is right at the top of our seawall. And if you were in certain areas of the city, I have my vehicle, my response vehicle is a Chevy Tahoe. It's a little bit jacked up, and there was areas that we couldn't get through.
Oh, wow.
And that, so we have dealt with some storm surge in the city, especially if it gets above the seawall. I mean, if we have a 10-foot storm surge and a 4.5 foot was at the top of the seawall, you're going to have another 6 feet coming over the wall. So that could flood all the way. Luckily, there's ridges in the state of Florida. So you have these main ridges that during the ice, to not bore you guys. So during the ice age, you had a recession of water. Every time the water receded a certain amount, it would create a ridge in the state of Florida. Right. Well, we happen to be sitting on a ridge in the city. That ridge runs basically just west of Dixie Highway. So storm surge usually around the Olive and East is a little bit worse, whereas if you're west of Olive, it's not as bad, depending on the amount of storm surge.
Sure.
But we do have the opportunity here to have that.
Now, we've been talking a lot about water and storm surge right at the water's edge. What about folks who live further west? Do they have to worry about it at all?
Yeah, we're not talking storm surge at that point, but we are talking flooding. So flooding could be a problem if you're in a neighborhood that doesn't have great drainage, and a lot of the older neighborhoods do not. They don't have great drainage systems. I mean, we have a really robust storm system in the city of West Palm Beach where we have great drainage. However, there are still a lot of low-lying areas in the city that we do worry about. And so you just got to be mindful of that. And if you are in one of those zones, once again, if you see on either one of the booklets that you can pick up or on the website, if you see you're in a zone and you're told to evacuate.
Okay, and that actually brings us to the next part of our discussion. It seems to me that you have a choice. Everybody has a choice. Do I stay or do I go? And so we've talked about some of the factors that are involved in making that decision. Flooding, the danger of the home that you're in. What other factors are really involved in making a decision?
So if you're in a zone and you're told to evacuate. Okay. However, if you're not, it's a personal preference, and I will tell you that it's very dependent on the person. But we have seen in the past, and I'll use let me think about which hurricane this was. We've had a few,
just a few hurricanes.
I'm trying to remember which hurricane it was, but it was basically making a direct beeline for us, and then wrapped around south of us, and came right up on the west coast. So we had a lot of people that evacuated from us to the west coast, and I want to say it was Irma.
I think you're right,
but I think it was Irma. So where they evacuated to the West Coast, and it hit harder on the West Coast than it did on the East Coast, even though we still got Category 2 winds, and it was, we still had we called it Treemageddon. We still had a lot of issues here in the city with that storm, but it wrapped on with the West Coast and then took a straight track right through Atlanta, almost similar to what happened in North Carolina. We saw that happen with Irma, where it went across the state and straight up through Georgia and the Carolinas. So the problem is those people that evacuated to the West Coast and into Georgia almost got it worse than what we got it.
Wow.
So it's like I said, it's a personal preference. We're not going to tell you if you're not in an evacuation zone. We're not going to tell you whether you need to or not. However, if you are going to, do it early. Don't wait, because one of the things that we see is that people that wait around and then do it late is they get trapped on the interstate. There is no gas because everybody's buying gas, and then you're running into other issues. So if you're gonna do it, do it early.
If you decide to stay and you say, okay, I'm not going to try to get on I-95. I'm not trying to move upstate or out over to the West Coast. I'm going to stay here in the county. Let's talk a little bit about shelters. What's the process of getting into a shelter? Do I just walk in, or what happens?
So most shelters that are open, that are not special needs or pet friendly, you can just go to. You don't have to register for them. You can just kind of show up.
Okay.
And depending on the amount of evacuation zones that we start to empty out, and what we think the storm surge is going to be, and there's a lot of factors to go into it. Depends on how many shelters open. Most of the time, we open anywhere between 9 and 12 shelters. Some of those are special needs and pet friendly. So if you are a special needs person that needs, like you have an oxygen machine you have to carry with you,
right,
or you have to do dialysis and you need a power source, you need to go ahead and register now with the county, with Palm Beach County Department of Emergency Management. If you go to their site and you put in special needs shelter, you'll find that there's a registration form. You can fill out that registration form, and that does help a lot with the process.
And that's an important point, that the shelters are run by the county. They're not
Correct.
a city operation.
Correct.
Don't call the city on that. Call the county.
So none of the municipalities. There's 39 municipalities in this county.
Right.
None of them operate shelters.
Okay.
The county operates shelters. That is actually a state statute that the counties operate those. And then the same thing with evacuation zones. The county actually is the one that determines when we're going to evacuate and who's going to evacuate.
When I go to a shelter, do I bring food and water? Do I bring bedding? What sort of things?
So when you go to a shelter, you literally only get a very small, about a 60, not even 60 square feet of area for you. You can basically get a cot and a small area around that cot for your stuff. So you shouldn't bring a lot.
Okay.
You shouldn't bring a lot with you. Try to, mostly the food and water will be provided at the shelter unless determined otherwise by the county. So you should be covered with that. But if you wanted to bring your own, pillow and stuff like that, I would absolutely bring it. I would not bring a lot of personal items. A lot of people like to grab as much as they can and bring it with them. The problem is there's just not a lot of space
for it.
And there's a good chance that they're going to tell you to leave it in your car.
Yeah.
Or you're going to have to take it back because they're not going to have space for it. It's a very limited, when we're talking about shelters, it's mostly schools. Or other government type buildings, but definitely schools. And the gym is basically the big sleeping areas, and then they'll may put people in the hallways, but that's it. I mean, there's not a lot of area for you to go. So just be sparse on what you bring.
And there's only very specific shelters, or a shelter that will accept pets.
Yeah, so the same thing with, very similar to a special needs shelter, you have to make sure you register for a pet-friendly shelter.
Okay. All right. So we've talked a lot about getting ready, what we need to have, what should we be doing prior to a storm, when we should be doing it. Let's talk just a little bit about, okay, there is a storm underway. I'm in my home. I'm in a place where it has not been evacuated. We have been asked to leave. What are the things that I shouldn't be doing? Should I open the door and look outside? What's going on?
So if it was 1985, I would say have a hurricane party because that's what everybody used to do.
Right.
But that, and I'm just, but
yeah, right.
basically, the biggest thing during the storm is you want to stay in the house. You want to have you want to make sure that you have a plan. So that plan includes Do I have a safe area in my house that I can go to if I have to? Somewhere there's no windows, an interior room. If it's a bathroom, even better, because then you can have the tub if you have a tub. I know a lot of houses now don't have tubs like the old days, but a tub is always a really good place to go because they're made out of some type of metal or cast iron, and if you have a collapse, they usually are pretty solid structures. And then make sure you have a plan. Make sure you have a plan with your family. If we have to leave this house, what is our safe area? Where are we going to go? If we get split up, where are we going to meet? And then are we going to go to a neighbor's house? Are we going to go to the car? All of these things are factors. So you got to make sure that you have that plan. I actually go over it with my son pretty regularly. Like, hey, if we had a fire in the house or we had something, how are you getting out? And, he tells me how. So, and I say, okay, where are we meeting? Oh, we're meeting at the park across the street. So there's all of these factors that you want to make sure that you have, especially with your family, because you want to make sure that your family's safe and they know what's going on. The biggest thing is if you're going to stay behind, once the storm is cleared, stay at your house. If you have to make some repairs to your house, that's fine. Go outside. But you got to also remember there's a lot of things going on post-storm. Is there power lines down? Is there tree branches hanging on by a thread that could fall at any time? Is there flooding outside of your house and that you're going to get caught up in? Is there, in Florida, we are in Florida, if there is flooding, is there going to be snakes, and is there going to be gators, and is there going to be any number of things? If you're on the West Coast, apparently, and I don't know how true it is, there's sharks on the street. So, make sure that you don't go out. And then the other part of this is you may be impeding the first responders. If you're out, a lot of people like to be looky-loos and get in their car and try to drive around. This is a double whammy. So number one, you might get in trouble, and then we got to come get you. Number two, you're in the way. So if we're trying, our first 72 hours is really about life safety. It's about going out and trying to rescue people and responding to the calls that have been queued up for the last however many hours, depending on the storm. And we have to get through. We have cut teams that go out and they're cutting trees and throwing them out of the roadway. And if you're out there, you're in the way. If you're blocking one of the trees and you can't get out, then we can't cut the tree, and it impedes the right away for our first responders to get through. So just stay home. Stay home for the first couple of days. There'll be plenty of pictures. We take pictures and we post them and that kind of stuff. There'll be plenty of that stuff that you can see. Stay close to your house. Don't try to get too far away, because then you could become a victim as well.
Sure. One of the things that I wanted to touch on was the need for information and getting communication out properly. Now we live in a world where, you're going to call up Instagram and you're going to see a map of where the storm is heading. Who knows who put it there?
Right.
Who knows if it's correct? What advice do we have for folks so that they get the right information for our area, for the folks who live in West Palm Beach?
Local officials, local news. We feed the news constantly. We are constantly giving them information so that they can put information out. Same thing with our social media, the city social media, the city hotline, which is the 822-222 number. These are all ways to get the information. Do not listen to people who are not experts at this. Do not listen to people that are talking heads and just want to get clicks for you. I see it a lot. I see it even on YouTube, and I see it on some of these other Facebook and things like that.
Yeah.
I see these people that want to get clicks, and they'll say major hurricane, major this, or storm systems already. And it's funny because they're not even, number one, they're not experts. And number two, they're not even local people. They're people they may be sitting in their house in New Jersey just trying to get clicks.
Right.
So it's more about just listening to local officials, making sure that you have the right things in place. So make sure you're watching whatever news channel you watch. Make sure that you're following the city or the city fire department or the city police department on Instagram or Facebook or whatever social media you're on, and stay off of the people who are not in any of those capacities, because you're going to be getting false information.
And when you say local news channels, I think it's also important to point out, listen to West Palm Beach local news. Nothing against the folks in Miami, but
Right.
there's a big difference between hitting a storm hitting in Miami and hitting West Palm Beach.
Yeah, anytime you're talking about a 70-mile difference, that could be a huge difference in a storm. So, you could get, and I'll bring up Milton once again. Milton hit the West Coast. It hit 150 miles away from us, but yet we had the worst damage of anybody because between the Tri-County area, Palm Beach, Martin, and St. Lucie. the tornadoes that came off of that storm were insane. They're some of the most. I've lived here my entire life since 1970. Well, not my entire life, but since 1977, and it's still worse. That's the worst tornadoes I've ever seen.
Wow.
In Florida.
So every hurricane season is unique. There are all kinds of forecasts going back and forth. Here we are this year. What is the general advice you'd want to give folks for this hurricane season?
Just be prepared. The biggest thing is be prepared, and just don't listen to all the talking heads about things. Listen to the National Weather Service, listen to the Colorado State University. Those are the people that are putting these forecasts together. And honestly, it's a forecast, and it only takes one storm. Andrew's a perfect example. We were in a down year with Andrew. It was a late August. We hadn't even had a storm in the basin yet, and out of nowhere, here comes Andrew, and Andrew was devastating. Yeah. And it was the only devastating. It was the only storm that season that was really a bad storm. So it only takes one. Whether it's we're going to get 15 storms this year or whether we're going to get 30 storms this year, doesn't really matter, because it takes that one storm that comes across and just devastates everything. So the biggest thing is just be prepared, build your kit, have a plan, and make sure you know your evacuation zones.
Brent Bloomfield, thank you so much for what you do. We appreciate you being here.
Awesome. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. This has been the City Center podcast from West Palm Beach. This is a product of the City of West Palm Beach Communications Department. We'll see you next time.